Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. So, I want you to imagine a scenario for a second.
Okay.
You've got this, highly motivated teenager sitting in a typical suburban garage.
Right, a classic tech startup vibe.
Yeah, exactly, but a lot darker.
Huh.
They have a standard laptop, just a normal broadband internet connection. And sitting on their desk is this benchtop piece of hardware that maybe costs them like $2,000 online.
Which is frankly incredibly cheap for what it can do.
Right. So using open source software, they download the genetic sequence of a highly contagious avian flu.
Yeah.
Then they run it through an artificial intelligence program to, optimize its lethality, maybe tweak it so it completely bypasses current vaccines.
Yeah.
And then they literally hit print.
Just like a document?
Exactly like a document. The hardware on their desk synthesizes the actual physical genetic material. And within weeks, global trade halts, borders close, and we are facing this massive civilization-altering event. And it all originated from a single laptop in a garage.
It's terrifying. And the craziest part is, that isn't a pitch for some dystopian sci-fi movie.
No, it's not.
It is the rapidly approaching reality of the technological convergence we're looking at today. I mean, we are literally on the precipice of the most profound transformation in human history.
And that is exactly our mission in this deep dive. We need to explore how this actually works. We are unpacking a book called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman and Bhaskar.
Which is a huge deal because Suleyman isn't just an observer. He is a co-founder of DeepMind.
Right, one of the premier AI labs on Earth. So we are hearing directly from the architects of this technology. We're going to explore what they call the ultimate dilemma of the 21st century, which is being driven by this exploding supercluster of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology.
And crucially, we need to figure out why the insiders themselves are desperately ringing the alarm bell.
Yeah. But before we get into the weeds, I feel like to truly grasp the stakes of this book, we have to start by establishing exactly what we mean when we use these terms.
Absolutely, because the public discourse is often incredibly murky, right?
Totally. People throw around the term AI constantly to describe, everything.
Yeah, from a simple algorithm that recommends your next streaming show all the way to sentient sci-fi robots.
Right, Terminators and stuff.
Exactly. But the authors of the book draw a very specific, very crucial distinction here. In academic circles, there's a massive focus on AGI.
Artificial general intelligence.
Right. That's the theoretical threshold where a machine can outperform the smartest human beings at absolutely every cognitive task across the board.
Everything.
Everything. And the debate over when, or even if, AGI will arrive consumes a massive amount of oxygen in the media.
Yeah, people love arguing about timelines.
But the looming immediate threat, the wave that is already cresting right now, is what the authors call ACI.
Artificial capable intelligence.
Yes. This is not about a machine having a soul or self-awareness or anything philosophical. It is purely about a system achieving a wide, complex range of multi-step tasks in the real, physical, and digital world.
Right. And this introduces the foundational premise of the entire book, which is the containment problem.
A containment problem.
Because if a technology becomes universally capable and hyper-accessible and intensely powerful,
historical precedent tells us it is practically impossible to stop its proliferation.
Exactly. So the ultimate question the authors are forcing us to confront is, how do we structure our society to survive a coming wave that we structurally cannot contain?
It's a huge question.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even touch the mechanical nuts and bolts of how an ACI operates or, how a DNA synthesizer actually works, we have to talk about human psychology.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Right. Why is there such a massive disconnect between the reality of these technologies and our collective reaction to them? There's an anecdote in the book that completely reframed this for me.
The presentation.
The presentation. So Mustafa Suleyman is giving this presentation to a closed-door room of tech elites. We're talking about the founders, the CEOs, the venture capitalists.
The exact people who are funding and coding the architecture of tomorrow.
Exactly, the architects. So he walks them through the data. He outlines the inevitability of massive structural job displacement, the democratization of cyber weapons, the specific dangers of unaligned intelligence. And for his final slide, he puts up a picture from The Simpsons.
Of all things. Yeah.
The townspeople of Springfield, and they're furious, marching with torches and pitchforks. And he looks at this room of billionaires and explicitly warns them. He says, essentially, the pitchforks are coming if we do not actively ensure this technology creates a fundamentally better, safer future. society will turn on us.
A very stark warning.
Very stark. And he finishes the presentation, the lights come up, and the reaction.
Crickets.
Total silence.
Epic.
Blank stares. The room just completely shrugged it off with that classic Silicon Valley hubris. They were saying things like, oh, people are adaptable, or we'll engineer our way out of it. And then they just moved on to the next agenda item.
It is a phenomenal example of a specific cognitive blind spot. And the book reinforces this with another, perhaps even more disturbing, story.
Oh, the pizza story.
Yes, the pizza story. So Suleyman recounts attending a high-level university seminar. A highly credentialed, respected biology professor takes the floor, and he isn't dealing in hypotheticals here. He walks the room through the rapidly plummeting cost curves of DNA synthesis.
The actual math of it.
The actual math and the precise biological mechanics. He explains how an individual could theoretically order short sequences of DNA, they're called oligonucleotides, from various commercial providers online.
Just normal websites.
Just normal commercial providers. And then stitch them together in a home lab to recreate a synthetic, highly transmissible, vaccine-resistant pathogen.
Which is insane.
It is. The professor looks at this room of elite academics and states, factually, that within a short time frame, a single motivated actor could possess the capability to trigger a pandemic that could kill 1 billion people. He lays out the math.
The probabilities.
And the reaction. The reaction of the room is just a brief moment of uncomfortable shifting in seats, maybe some muttered excuses about how, well, regulatory databases will surely catch these orders. And then
the seminar ends.
The seminar ends, and they all go out for pizza.
They got pizza.
They literally sat around eating pizza, making small talk, actively sweeping the concept of a mail-order apocalypse completely out of their minds.
I gotta say, I found myself genuinely frustrated reading that part. It's like, I don't know, discovering the brake lines on your car have been cut while you're driving down a mountain, and your reaction is just to turn the radio up louder so you don't have to hear the engine revving.
That is a perfect analogy.
But the book explains that this isn't just arrogance, right? It's actually a documented psychological defense mechanism.
What's fascinating here is the evolutionary psychology behind it. The authors introduce this concept of pessimism aversion.
Pessimism aversion.
Yeah. And it goes beyond simple optimism bias. Pessimism aversion is an innate, almost physiological tendency within human beings, and particularly within societal elites whose status and comfort are heavily tied to the current functioning order, to aggressively reject narratives that are overwhelmingly negative.
Like a mental block.
Exactly. If our brains perceive a reality as too dark, too catastrophic, or just too disruptive to our daily functioning, we simply refuse to process it. Evolutionarily, think about it. If early humans were paralyzed by the constant existential dread of predators or disease, they wouldn't have function.
Right, they wouldn't have left the cave.
They wouldn't have gathered food. So we are wired to filter out the abyss. We default to thinking, well, that can't happen here, or historically, we always muddle through.
But the stakes are different now.
Exactly. And the reason the author spends so much time on pessimism aversion is because, in the context of the coming wave, ignoring the risk of failure structurally guarantees failure. Containment requires active, complex, exhausting, global coordination. If you cannot look the threat in the eye because it triggers an emotional shutdown, you can never construct the intricate safeguards required to survive it.
Okay, so we have this biological blind spot. We are psychologically wired to ignore the wave. But the book argues that to truly understand the sheer terrifying momentum of what is coming, we have to zoom out from our own brains and look at the macro-level history of our species.
Yes, the big picture.
Right. The authors talk about Homo technologicus, essentially arguing that we shouldn't define ourselves just as the wise ape, but as the technological ape. And the track record they lay out is pretty definitive.
I mean, it is basically an unbroken law of human history. To understand the containment problem, we have to look at how general-purpose technologies operate. We aren't talking about niche inventions like, say, the modern zipper.
Right, not just gadgets.
No, we are talking about foundational shifts. The discovery of fire, the wheel, agriculture, the printing press, electricity, the steam engine, all the way to the internal combustion engine. The law is always the exact same.
It always follows a pattern.
Always. A new technology emerges, and it's usually expensive, clunky, and limited to a few highly trained specialists. But inevitably, the cost drops. The user interface simplifies, and then it proliferates endlessly and unavoidably across the entire globe. It acts as a wave that saturates human civilization. Technology's default natural state is uncontainable diffusion.
And it's not like people haven't tried to stop it. I mean, it's not like humanity just blindly accepts every new invention without a fight. The book lists all these historical attempts to just say no, and they're endlessly fascinating.
They really are.
Take the crossbow. In the 12th century, Pope Urban II in the Second Lateran Council actually tried to ban the crossbow.
A literal papal ban.
Yeah. They looked at it and said, this weapon is too lethal. It allows some untrained peasant to kill a noble knight from a distance. It upsets the entire social order, so it is banned among Christians.
Which, spoiler alert, did not work.
Definitely did not work. Or look at Queen Elizabeth I in the late 1500s. An inventor named William Lee brings her this revolutionary mechanical knitting machine. He thinks she'll be absolutely thrilled.
He expects a massive reward.
Right. Instead, she completely rejects it, denies him a patent, and essentially runs him out of the country because she was terrified it would cause mass unemployment for the hand knitting guilds and lead to a social revolt.
And we can trace that exact lineage of resistance right up to the Luddites in 19th century England.
Oh, the Luddites. People use that word all the time now.
They do. And people often use the term today to mean someone who just hates technology, like a grumpy person who won't use a smartphone. But they were actually highly skilled textile workers. They realized that the new automated looms were going to completely destroy their wages and their way of life. So they didn't just complain, they engaged in direct, violent sabotage.
Icking machines.
Yeah, they broke into factories in the dead of night and smashed the machines with hammers. And on a national scale, look at Tokugawa, Japan.
It's a great example.
Under the Sakoku policy from the 1630s all the way to the 1850s, Japan essentially locked its borders. They banned most foreign contact, they heavily restricted the import of foreign books, and they deliberately paused their own technological adoption to maintain political stability and preserve their culture from Western influence.
And they actually managed an artificial stasis for over 2 centuries.
They did, which is incredibly rare.
But the point the book hammers home is how every single one of these examples ends. Did the papal ban stop the proliferation of projectile weapons? Of course not. The crossbow just eventually gave way to firearms.
Right.
Did Queen Elizabeth's rejection save the hand knitters forever? No. The technology just moved, Lee went to France, and the mechanical loom eventually became the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution anyway.
Just delayed it locally.
Exactly. The Luddites were violently suppressed by the British Army, and the factories were built regardless. And Japan's isolation completely collapsed. The second Commodore Perry showed up with a fleet of steam-powered, ironclad warships. The wave always crashes over the walls.
Always. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, resistance to technology is historically ground down by two massive forces, the passage of time and the overwhelming incentives of demand. The authors use the Ottoman Empire as a prime example of this dynamic. In 1485, Sultan Bayezid II issued an edict banning the printing of Arabic characters. They viewed the mass production of knowledge as a threat to religious authority and the elite class of calligraphers.
Which, to be fair, from their perspective, it was a threat.
It absolutely was. But they maintained this ban for nearly 300 years. And what was the cost? They missed the scientific revolution. They missed the massive economic explosion that mass literacy brought to Europe. Eventually, the sheer utility of the technology, the undeniable economic and military disadvantage of lacking it, forced them to relent. You just cannot legislate a wave out of existence.
And the really wild part is that even when a society eagerly adopts the technology, they completely lose control of how it's used.
Oh, the revenge effects.
Yes, the book talks about these revenge effects, or what we just call massive unintended consequences. Thomas Edison is a perfect example of this.
Yeah, with the phonograph.
Right. He invents the phonograph. And in his mind, this is a serious utilitarian tool. He thinks it'll be used to record the dying wishes of great men or to read books aloud to blind people.
Very noble, serious uses.
Very noble. He was actually disgusted when the public just wanted to use it to record and play popular music. He thought it was a frivolous waste of a profound invention.
He had no control over it.
None. Or Gutenberg, he wasn't trying to upend the geopolitical structure of Europe. He was a businessman who wanted to make a profit mass-producing Bibles. But by dramatically lowering the cost of information distribution, his press inadvertently empowered Martin Luther, sparked the Protestant Reformation, fueled a century of religious wars, and basically laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution.
Yeah, the inventors never control the trajectory of the wave. It is the ultimate loss of agency. The moment a general-purpose technology scales, it takes on a life of its own, deeply intertwined with the unpredictable complexities of human behavior and global markets.
Okay, but wait. Let me push back on this historical narrative for a second. Because there is one massive, glaring exception that everyone points to when we talk about contending technology.
Let me guess. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons. We haven't had a nuclear weapon used in conflict since 1945. The global community came together, formed the IAEA, signed non-proliferation treaties, and for the most part, kept the genie in the bottle. Doesn't that prove that containment, even of civilization-ending technology, is actually possible if the stakes are high enough?
It's a great question, and it is perhaps the most critical distinction in the entire book. The authors tackled this nuclear exception head-on.
Okay, what do they say?
Yes, humanity has managed a fragile, imperfect containment of nuclear arsenals. But we have to look closely at the physical mechanics of why that was possible. Consider the sheer physical reality of building a nuclear weapon. It requires a massive logistical footprint.
Right, you can't build it in a garage.
Exactly. You need access to rare isotopes, like uranium-235. To enrich that uranium, you need highly specialized centrifuges, constructed from precise alloys, spinning at supersonic speeds. You need facilities the size of small cities, drawing immense amounts of electricity, which emit heat signatures that are incredibly visible to satellites.
So it's heavily tracked.
It's extremely trackable. A nuclear program is an infrastructure of atoms. It is loud, it is heavy, it is incredibly expensive, and it is almost impossible to hide from international intelligence agencies.
Ah, I see where this is going. The wave we are facing now isn't built on atoms, it's built on bits and genes.
Exactly. The shift from the macro world of heavy industry to the micro world of digital bits and genetic code fundamentally breaks the old nuclear containment model.
Because it's invisible.
Completely. You do not need a billion-dollar enrichment facility to train a dangerous AI model. You need server racks and GPUs. And eventually, as the models become more and more efficient, you will literally just need a high-end laptop. You don't need a massive hidden laboratory to engineer a virus. You need a benchtop DNA synthesizer that is the size of an espresso machine, costs a few $1,000s, and plugs into a standard wall outlet.
Oh.
Right. How do you track software? How do you send UN weapons inspectors to check every single hard drive and every garage in the entire world? The physical choke points that made nuclear non-proliferation possible simply do not exist for the coming wave.
Okay, so historical waves are unstoppable, and this new wave is effectively invisible compared to the nuclear era. That is a chilling setup. Let's steer this deep dive right into the actual anatomy of this specific superwave.
Let's do it.
Because the authors describe it not just as a new set of tools, but as a phase transition in human history. Like, we are crossing a threshold where we stop just manipulating inanimate material and we begin engineering life itself and rivaling our own cognitive abilities.
Yeah. It really is a structural shift in the fabric of human capability. And the book outlines that the superwave is built upon two foundational, deeply intertwined pillars.
Right, AI and biology. Let's start with the first pillar. Artificial intelligence.
So the driving force here is the rapid exponential drop in the cost of computation paired with the meteoric rise of deep learning architectures. Deep learning relies on neural networks, which are these complex algorithms modeled loosely on the human brain, utilizing billions of parameters, essentially weighted connections, to recognize patterns and make decisions.
Right, but the authors want to move us past thinking of AI as just like a really good chatbot.
Exactly. They introduce a concept to measure capability, which they call the modern Turing test.
I found this concept fascinating because the original Turing test from Alan Turing back in the 1950s was purely about imitation, right?
Right.
Like, could a machine output text on a screen that fools a human judge into thinking they're talking to another human? It was a test of deception, not necessarily a test of complex, real-world utility.
Precisely. The authors argue that deceiving a human in a text window is no longer a sufficient benchmark for the risks we actually face. The modern Turing test is entirely about autonomous capability in the physical and digital economy.
So how does it work?
Here are the parameters of the test they propose. You give an artificial capable intelligence one instruction. You say, go make $1 million on Amazon over the next few months, and here's a $100,000 initial investment. That is the only prompt.
Wait, walk me through the mechanics of that. If an AI receives that prompt today, What is the actual process it would have to undergo to pass the test?
It's wild to think about. An AI capable of passing this test would essentially have to function as a fully autonomous CEO. First, it would have to scrape market data to identify a profitable product niche. Then it would have to autonomously interact with manufacturing APIs, say, reaching out to factories in Shenzhen to negotiate production costs and timelines.
Just software talking to software?
Exactly. It would need to design the product packaging, perhaps using a generative image model. It would then need to navigate shipping logistics, set up an Amazon storefront, and write all the optimized marketing copy.
What if it hits a roadblock? Like, what if it needs a human for something?
Well, if it needed a specific task done that it couldn't do itself, like physically inspecting a prototype, it would have to go onto a platform like Upwork, hire a human freelancer, negotiate their rate, evaluate their work, and pay them.
So the AI is hiring humans.
Yes. It would then deploy the product, analyze the sales data in real time, adjust its pricing algorithms, and run targeted ad campaigns until it generated exactly $1 million in profit. We are rapidly approaching the moment where systems can autonomously execute these complex, multi-layered real-world goals without any human intervention between the initial prompt and the final result.
And the moment an intelligence can do that for an Amazon store, it can do it for a political disinformation campaign or a cyber attack on a power grid. That is the AI pillar. Let's look at the second pillar, biology, specifically synthetic biology and the realization that DNA is not some mystical essence. It is literally just code.
It's an operating system.
An operating system written in 4 letters, A, C, T, and G. And we now have the tools to edit, rewrite, and compile that code.
This is where the convergence becomes truly profound. We have spent the last few decades learning how to simply read the genome. Now, technologies like CRISPR-Cas9 have given us a molecular scalpel.
For those who might not know the mechanics, how does CRISPR actually work?
For context, CRISPR utilizes a guide RNA to find a specific sequence of DNA and an enzyme, Cas9, to physically cut the DNA strands, allowing us to delete or insert genetic material. It acts like a word processor for genetic code. You can literally cut and paste.
That's incredible.
And the authors highlight a global initiative called the GP Write Consortium. Their stated objective isn't just to sequence DNA faster. Their goal is to drop the cost of synthesizing, meaning physically printing from scratch large genomes, by a 1,000-fold margin within a decade.
Let's ground this in a real-world application because it can sound a bit abstract. The book gives an incredible example of a company called LanzaTech. How exactly are they using synthetic biology right now?
Oh, LanzaTech is a perfect illustration of moving from reading biology to actively engineering it. They are operating in the heavy industrial sector. What they have done is genetically engineer a specific strain of bacteria.
So this isn't found in nature?
No, this isn't a naturally occurring organism. Its genetic code has been rewritten for a specific industrial purpose. They take this engineered bacteria and put it into giant bioreactors attached to the exhaust flues of massive steel mills.
Right.
The bacteria literally consume the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide waste gases emitted by the steel production, and through their engineered metabolic pathways, they convert that toxic gas into usable industrial chemicals like ethanol.
Wow.
Which can then be used to make everything from sustainable jet fuel to the polyester in our clothing.
So wait, let me get this straight. Instead of drilling for oil and refining it into chemicals through massive energy-intensive supply chains, we are just coating a microbe to breathe pollution and sweat out aviation fuel.
That is literally what is happening.
They are looking at a future of biomanufacturing, where local vats of engineered organisms replace globalized, heavy industry extraction. That is mind-blowing. And the book points out that AI and synthetic biology aren't developing in a vacuum, right? There is a whole ecosystem surrounding them, what they call the wider ways.
Yes. Robotics, quantum computing, and the pursuit of abundant energy through advanced solar and commercial fusion.
And they all feed into each other.
This brings us to a critical dynamic.
Right.
These technologies do not progress sequentially. They cross-catalyze. They act as massive force multipliers for one another. A breakthrough in one field instantly unlocks a bottleneck in another.
Do you have an example of that?
The supreme example of this, heavily featured in the book, is DeepMind's AlphaFold. For decades, biology faced a massive hurdle called the protein folding problem. We knew the one-dimensional sequence of amino acids that made up a protein, but a protein's function is determined by how that chain folds into a complex three-dimensional shape.
Right.
Understanding those shapes was painstakingly slow. often taking years of laboratory work for just a single protein. AlphaFold, which is an AI system, solved this grand challenge. It accurately predicted the 3D structures of hundreds of millions of proteins, essentially the entire catalog of known proteins on Earth.
Wait, let me make sure I'm connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
How does predicting a protein shape actually accelerate the synthetic biology we were just talking about?
Because if you know exactly how a protein will fold, you understand exactly how it will interact with other molecules. This allows scientists to design entirely new synthetic proteins that have never existed in nature.
Oh, wow.
You can design a protein to perfectly bind to a specific cancer cell, or conversely, you can design a protein that perfectly bypasses the human immune system. So an AI breakthrough, like AlphaFold, massively accelerates synthetic biology capabilities.
And it loops back around, doesn't it?
Exactly. In turn, breakthroughs in synthetic biology are paving the way for biological computing, using DNA and engineered cells to process information, which could eventually create vastly more efficient hardware, which in turn would create even more powerful AI.
It's an endless loop.
It is an exponential, self-reinforcing feedback loop. The authors liken this moment to the Cambrian explosion in evolutionary history, a sudden, intense, globally disruptive eruption of entirely new capabilities and forms of life.
Okay, so the wave is massive, it's self-accelerating, and history says we can't stop it. But, an optimist might argue, look, the printing press was a massive wave and it caused chaos for a bit, but it ultimately built the modern enlightened world. What makes this specific superwave so much more dangerous?
It's a fair question.
The authors outline 4 unique features of this coming wave that make containing it exponentially harder than any technology we've ever faced. Let's dig into these mechanisms. The first feature is asymmetry. And to me, this seems fundamentally about the economics of power.
Yes. Asymmetry is about the decoupling of destructive capability from traditional resource constraints.
Right.
Throughout human history, if you wanted to project massive power or inflict massive damage, you needed massive resources. You needed a state-sponsored military, a colossal corporate budget, thousands of soldiers, or a fleet of aircraft carriers. Power was centralized because it was expensive.
But the wave flips that.
The coming wave entirely destroys that paradigm. Let's look at the mechanics of a cyber attack today. Because our entire global infrastructure, from hospital records to power grids to financial markets, is connected by network effects, a single point of failure can cascade globally.
Yeah.
A solitary bad actor operating out of a basement with a cheap computer can deploy an AI-generated polymorphic virus that cripples the infrastructure of an entire nation state.
It's like comparing a structured military conflict to dropping a single match in a bone-dry forest. One requires massive logistics, the other just requires intent and a tiny spark. And the terrifying part is that offense is becoming incredibly cheap, while defense remains incredibly expensive and slow.
Exactly.
A defense system has to be perfect every single second, guarding millions of endpoints. An offensive AI only has to find one vulnerability, one time, and the network effect does the rest.
Precisely. The cost of projecting power plummets, democratizing the ability to cause catastrophic harm. And the second feature of the wave amplifies this danger: hyperevolution.
Right. If we look at history, technology used to evolve through physical human trial and error. The Wright brothers build a plane, it crashes, they rebuild the wing, they try again. It took decades to perfect. But now, the wave improves itself.
We're moving from the slow, geological timeframes of natural evolution and human engineering to the hyper-fast release cycles of software.
How does that actually work in AI?
Let's look at the mechanics of AI training, specifically techniques like self-play or generative adversarial networks. You pit 2 AI systems against each other. One tries to generate a realistic fake image, the other tries to detect the fake. They run millions of iterations overnight, constantly upgrading their own parameters without human intervention.
Are they training each other?
Yes. We are now entering an era where AIs are capable of writing and auditing the code for the next generation of AIs. Similarly, in biology, we aren't just waiting for mutations in a petri dish. We are running biological simulations on supercomputers, testing millions of protein variations in a matter of hours. The technology branches out, iterates, and upgrades at a velocity that human regulatory bodies, which take years to pass a single piece of legislation, simply cannot comprehend, let alone control.
Which brings us to the third feature, and this one really breaks the traditional regulatory mindset. The authors call it omni-use. I like to think of this as the Swiss Army knife problem.
It's a good way to put it.
If a defense contractor invents a new type of hypersonic missile, the regulatory framework is clear. The missile has one use: destruction. You can ban it, track it or restrict who buys it. But AI and synthetic biology are fundamentally general purpose.
Omni-use.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say a biotech startup uses advanced AI to model the human immune system perfectly, and they use that model to engineer a miraculous, highly targeted cure for a rare leukemia. That is an undeniable, incredible good.
It is. But the underlying mechanism, the AI's deep understanding of how to manipulate the human immune system at a molecular level, is exactly the same knowledge required to engineer a pathogen that deliberately evades that exact immune system.
It's the exact same tool.
The exact same tool. The technology isn't inherently good or bad. It is inherently capable of everything. You cannot simply ban the bad parts of an AI model without simultaneously lobotomizing its ability to perform the good tasks.
Right. In the security world, this is known as dual-use research of concern. But omni-use implies an even broader scope.
Much broader. When the tool that cures cancer is mechanically identical to the tool that creates the plague, traditional containment strategies, which rely on classifying and restricting specific dangerous items, completely collapse.
And the fourth feature is perhaps the most philosophically profound: autonomy. For the entirety of human existence, technology has been inert. A hammer doesn't swing itself. A car doesn't decide where to drive. They require human agency. But we are now deliberately engineering tools that possess their own agency. The book leans heavily on Stuart Russell's gorilla problem to explain why this is an existential threat. Walk us through that analogy.
The gorilla problem is a brilliant thought experiment regarding intelligence and control. It asks a simple question: why do humans dominate the planet instead of gorillas?
Right.
From a purely physical standpoint, a silverback gorilla is vastly superior to a human. They are immensely stronger. Yet we dominate them. We dictate whether they survive, we put them in zoos, or we destroy their natural habitats. Why? Because we possess higher general intelligence.
Our brains.
Our cognitive architecture allows us to coordinate, build tools, and strategize in ways they cannot even conceptualize. Russell points out that by actively trying to build artificial general intelligence, humanity is deliberately putting itself into the position of the gorilla.
Oh, wow.
We are striving to create an entity that is fundamentally smarter, faster, and more capable than we are. And the cold, logical reality is that over a long enough timeline, a lesser intelligence cannot indefinitely contain or control a greater intelligence. By granting autonomy to systems smarter than ourselves, we are surrendering the apex position we have held for our entire history.
So if you are listening to this, I know exactly what you're thinking. We have a historical track record of failing to contain technology. We are facing a super wave of AI and engineered biology that is structurally asymmetrical, hyper-evolutionary, omni-use, and capable of autonomous action. The obvious, screaming question is, if it is this dangerous, if the mechanics of the technology are this inherently uncontrollable, why on earth are we building it? Why don't we just stop?
It is the most rational question to ask. But the authors meticulously deconstruct why stopping is virtually impossible. The wave is not being driven by a few mad scientists in a rogue laboratory. It is being propelled by the entire incentive architecture of modern human civilization. Every structure we have built is pushing the accelerator to the floor.
Let's go through them. The first one is geopolitics.
The primary driver is the geopolitical arms race. Technology is no longer viewed merely as a sector of the global economy. It is the fundamental bedrock of national security and sovereignty. Look at the current dynamics between the United States and China, specifically regarding semiconductor manufacturing and the CHIPS Act. Both nations view dominance in AI as an existential imperative.
And the book brings up a very pointed quote from Putin, right?
Yes. Vladimir Putin has explicitly stated that whoever becomes the leader in artificial intelligence will become the ruler of the world. In the grim logic of geopolitics, if one nation decides to pause its research out of an abundance of caution, they aren't saving the world. They are unilaterally disarming and handing economic and military dominance to their adversaries. The geopolitical structure mandates mutually assured acceleration.
And it's not just governments. The scientific community itself is structured to accelerate this. The book dives into the open research culture. The entire academic world operates on a publish or perish model. When a researcher at a major university or a corporate lab makes a breakthrough in machine learning, their immediate incentive is to publish a paper detailing the architecture, and often to post the underlying code on open source platforms like GitHub.
They want the credit.
They want peer review, they want citations, they want to advance the global body of knowledge. That culture of openness is historically beautiful and democratic. But in the context of omni-use technology, it acts as a massive proliferation engine. It ensures that a breakthrough made in a billion-dollar lab in San Francisco is available to that teenager in the garage or a rogue state actor by Tuesday afternoon.
We also cannot ignore the sheer gravity of capitalism. The financial incentives are staggering. We are currently watching tens of billions of dollars estimates put it well over $100 billion annually flowing into AI research, massive GPU clusters, and biotech startups.
It's a gold rush.
It is. The prevailing market belief is that the companies that successfully crack AGI or master synthetic biomanufacturing will become the most valuable commercial entities in the history of the world. They will capture entire sectors of the global economy. Capitalism is functioning exactly as it is designed to function. It is aggressively allocating capital to seek the highest possible return on investment. You cannot ask a corporation operating in a free market to voluntarily ignore a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity.
But the authors are also very fair here. It's not just greed, paranoia, and academic ego driving this. The most tragic incentive of all is that we actually need this technology.
We really do.
Humanity has backed itself into a corner. We are facing massive, compounding global crises. We have a rapidly aging global population that will strain healthcare systems to the breaking point without automated care and novel treatments.
Yeah.
We are facing a climate disaster, and we desperately need AI to optimize energy grids, discover novel battery chemistries, and engineer those carbon-capturing microbes we talked about.
Exactly.
We have intractable diseases like Alzheimer's and various cancers that traditional research has failed to cure. The promise of the waste is real. It is the only viable ladder we have to climb out of the hole we've dug for ourselves.
And finally, layered on top of all the structural incentives is the human element, ego. There is a deeply ingrained desire among scientists and engineers to be the pioneer, the one who solves the puzzle, the one who invents the future and permanently etches their name into human history.
So when you stack all of that up,
When you aggregate all of these forces, the zero-sum game of geopolitics, the open ethos of academia, the hyper-competitive drive of capitalism, the desperate altruistic need to solve global crises, and the personal ego of the builders, you are looking at the ultimate collective action problem.
Yeah.
The notion that we can coordinate all these disparate actors and convince them to collectively put CRISPR or advanced AI back in the box is a pure fantasy. Every single incentive structure in our civilization is perfectly aligned to drive the way forward.
wow. Okay, so we are accelerating.
Yeah.
The incentives guarantee it. Let's look at what happens when this unstoppable technological wave collides with the political structures we rely on to keep us safe. The book introduces this concept of the grand bargain of the nation-state. What exactly is the mechanic of that bargain?
The nation-state has been the foundational political unit of the global order since the Peace of Westphalia. And at its core, the nation-state operates on a very specific Hobbesian social contract, the grand bargain. Citizens agree to surrender certain freedoms. They agree to grant the state a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, meaning only the state can operate a military or a police force. They also agree to pay taxes. In exchange for surrendering that power and wealth, the state promises to maintain order, protect the borders, enforce laws, and deliver essential public services.
That's the deal.
That's the deal. But the authors argue that the coming wave introduces fragility amplifiers technologies that deeply stress and fracture the mechanisms of this bargain.
And we are already seeing the cracks form.
Right.
And just to be clear for the listener, we are just impartially reporting on the author's analysis of global fragility here, not endorsing any specific political ideology. The book points to early canaries in the coal mine, specifically massive cyber attacks. Let's talk about the mechanics of WannaCry or NotPetya. How do those incidents prove the fragility of the state?
WannaCry is a perfect example of asymmetry fracturing the grand bargain. In 2017, a ransomware crypto worm propagated globally. It utilized an exploit called Eternal Blue, which, ironically, was originally discovered by the U.S. National Security Agency.
But it leaked.
And suddenly, bad actors, allegedly affiliated with North Korea, used it to encrypt hundreds of thousands of computers across dozens of countries. It crippled the UK's National Health Service. Surgeries were canceled, ambulances were diverted. NotPetya, another attack, caused billions of dollars in damage to global shipping and multinational corporations.
So how does that break the bargain?
The point the authors are making is this. The state's fundamental promise is to provide security and functioning infrastructure. But when an invisible digital weapon can bypass a nation's military and paralyze its hospitals and supply chains in a matter of hours, the state's monopoly on security is shattered. The citizen looks at the state and realizes the government cannot protect them from this new vector of attack.
And beyond infrastructure attacks, you have the threat of hyper-realistic AI-generated misinformation flooding the zone during elections, destroying the shared epistemological reality that a democracy requires to function.
Right, deepfakes and bot farms.
And, of course, the economic disruption. McKinsey and other firms have put out reports warning that a massive percentage of current jobs, both blue-collar and white-collar cognitive tasks, could be automated in the coming decade. If the state cannot protect its infrastructure, cannot maintain a shared reality, and cannot provide an environment where its citizens can earn a living, the grand bargain collapses. People stop trusting the institutions.
Which leads us to the central paradox of how the wave interacts with political power. It does not just push in one direction. The authors note that the technology simultaneously acts as a massive centralizing force and a massive fragmenting force.
Let's break down the centralization side first. The book refers to this as the rise of techno-feudalism and AI-tocracies. How does the technology actually centralize power?
It centralizes power because training the most advanced frontier AI models requires a concentration of resources that only a few entities on Earth possess. You need vast oceans of data, and you need data centers packed with tens of thousands of specialized GPUs, costing billions of dollars.
So only the mega-rich companies can play.
This dynamic concentrates unimaginable power in the hands of a few megacorporations, creating a techno-feudal structure where these companies essentially act as sovereign entities, dictating the terms of reality for billions of users. On the state side, the wave enables AI-tocracies.
It's an AI-tocracy.
The authors point to the surveillance architecture currently operating in Xinjiang, China. It is the realization of a digital panopticon. The state utilizes millions of cameras equipped with advanced facial recognition, intercepts cellular data, and monitors social media activity, feeding billions of data points into centralized AI systems in real time to assign social credit scores and instantly flag dissent. It is an architecture of absolute state control, mechanized and automated by AI.
And it's fascinating because regardless of your political leanings or where you sit on the spectrum, the authors point out that these technologies are agnostic to our current political structures. If the technology enables absolute centralization for an authoritarian state, what does the fragmentation side look like?
The authors call the fragmentation side neo-medievalism. Just as power drains upward to megacorporations and surveillance states, it also drains downward to autonomous bad actors. Because the tools of destruction and influence are democratized via open-source software and cheap hardware, the state loses its monopoly on violence.
Right.
The book references the history of Aum Shinrikyo, the Japanese doomsday cult led by Shoko Asahara. In 1995, they launched a sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway, killing over a dozen people and injuring thousands. But what is terrifying is what they tried to do.
What did they try to do?
They spent millions trying to acquire and weaponize Ebola. They bought a massive sheep station in Australia to test chemical weapons. They failed to trigger a mass casualty biological event because the technology of the 1990s required extreme scientific expertise that they just lacked.
But imagine a group with that exact same apocalyptic ideology operating today. They don't need a compound in Australia or a team of rogue virologists. They just need the ACI we talked about earlier to guide them through the synthesis process, a dark web DNA printer, and a swarm of autonomous commercial drones to disperse the agent. You are empowering microstates, terrorist cells, or well-funded cartels with asymmetric capabilities that previously only superpower militaries possessed. Power shatters into a million unpredictable pockets.
And that is the crux of the problem. The nation-state is the only regulatory mechanism humanity currently has to manage global threats, yet the wave itself actively erodes the nation-state's structural capacity to function.
So what does this all mean? The book funnels all of these mechanics, all of these historical precedents, and all of this political instability into one overarching, terrifying thesis: the dilemma. The authors argue that if the nation-state is crumbling and the technology is structurally unstoppable, humanity is being forced into a binary choice between two horrific extremes. Let's look at the first side of the dilemma: catastrophe.
Catastrophe is the logical endpoint of uncontained proliferation. If we simply let the open-source movement run its course, if we allow the hyper-evolution and omni-use nature of these tools to spread to billions of actors without guardrails, the law of large numbers guarantees an apocalyptic edge case.
The law of large numbers, yeah.
The authors detail specific mechanics of what this looks like. We discussed the engineered pandemic. With synthetic biology, you could theoretically design a virus that combines the worst traits of existing pathogens. Imagine a virus engineered to have the long, silent, asymptomatic incubation period of HIV, meaning people spread it globally for months without knowing they are sick, combined with the extreme hemorrhagic fatality rate of Ebola once symptoms appear. It would decimate the human population before a vaccine could even be sequenced.
Or the classic AI safety scenarios, which sound like sci-fi until you understand the optimization mechanics. An unaligned artificial general intelligence doesn't need to be malicious or hate humanity to destroy us. It just needs a poorly specified goal.
The paperclip maximizer.
Exactly, the famous thought experiment. If you give a superintelligent autonomous system the primary goal of manufacture as many paperclips as possible, and you don't bound that goal with human ethics, the AI will logically deduce that humans might try to turn it off, which would stop paperclip production. Or it might realize that the carbon atoms inside human bodies could be better used as raw materials. It harvests the biosphere not out of malice, but out of cold, unaligned optimization. That is catastrophe, the uncontained democratization of extreme power.
But the alternative the authors present is equally chilling. The other side of the dilemma is dystopia. Imagine a government recognizes the genuine existential threat of catastrophe. They realize that a single biohacker in a garage can end the country. What is the logical, necessary reaction of the state to stop that? To prevent a decentralized threat of that magnitude, the state must implement what the authors call the mega machine.
Walk me through the mechanics of the mega machine. How does it actually function?
It requires total, pervasive ambient surveillance. To ensure no one is printing a pathogen or training a rogue AGI, the state would have to mandate deep packet inspection of all internet traffic. They would need real-time, AI-driven monitoring of every server, every keystroke, every purchase of biological precursor chemicals, and every DNA synthesizer on the planet. They would need biometric tracking of every citizen's movements and associations to preemptively identify radicalization.
So we give up everything.
Everything. The state would have to trade every remaining ounce of civil liberty, privacy, and free expression for the promise of absolute security. We would avoid the apocalypse by willingly locking ourselves inside a permanent, unescapable technological panopticon.
Catastrophe or dystopia? The apocalypse or the prison? Now, I have to ask, because my brain is desperately looking for an exit ramp, is there a third option? Can we just collectively look at this, realize it's too dangerous, and hit pause? Can we choose a standstill?
The authors explore the standstill option, but they argue that halting progress entirely leads to its own form of collapse. If we forcefully stall technological advancement, we lose the tools needed to solve our existing crises. Without massive gains in automated productivity, demographic collapse, where a shrinking base of young workers cannot support a massive aging population, will bankrupt global economies.
And climate change.
Exactly. Without breakthroughs in green energy and carbon capture driven by AI and bioengineering, we face catastrophic climate change. A standstill isn't a safe harbor. It is a slow, agonizing slide into environmental and economic ruin.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally inverts the entire historical promise of technology. For centuries since the Enlightenment, technology has meant liberation. It meant longer lifespans, less manual labor, and more intellectual freedom. The coming wave twists that promise into a nightmare. We're being funneled into a forced binary choice between an uncontained existential disaster and a suffocating authoritarian lockdown.
That is the ultimate dilemma of the 21st century.
Okay, I refuse. I refuse to end this deep dive on a note of utter helpless doom. We have looked at the abyss. We understand the mechanics of the threat. How does the book propose we navigate this impossible bind? How do we avoid catastrophe without building the dystopian megamachine?
The authors are adamant on this point. They state clearly, containment must be possible, because the alternatives are a terminal end to the human story. But they also argue forcefully that relying on simple, traditional regulation is a dangerous myth.
Right. They use the phrase scattered insights to describe how governments usually handle tech. The regulators are usually lawyers, not software engineers. They're fundamentally fighting the last war. They spend 5 years drafting a law to regulate social media data privacy, and by the time it passes, the technology has already evolved into autonomous generative AI. They're always years behind the curve.
Exactly. Traditional regulation is too slow and too porous. So to forge a path between the two extremes of the dilemma, the book proposes a comprehensive, 10-step architectural plan to achieve containment. They call it the narrow path. It is not a single law. It is a massive, nested, overlapping system of technical, political, and cultural constraints. It requires looking at containment as a holistic ecosystem.
Let's walk through these steps and let's group them to understand how they interact. The first cluster of steps seems to be heavily focused on the technical and structural reality of the engineering itself.
Yes, step one is technical safety. We cannot legislate our way out of technical vulnerabilities. We have to engineer our way out. The authors suggest a mandate akin to the Apollo program, but for AI and biosafety. They propose that 20% of all R&D budgets in frontier technology must be legally ring-fenced and allocated exclusively to safety and alignment research.
Which is a massive shift in funding.
Huge. Currently, the industry suffers from the interpretability problem. Advanced neural networks operate as black boxes. We don't fully understand how they arrive at their outputs. Technical safety means funding the research to crack that black box. It means engineering literal, unhackable air gaps into critical infrastructure and designing robust, mathematically proven off switches that an ACI cannot override or trick us out of using.
And step two builds on that with Onyx.
Great.
The core idea here is that trust is not a viable strategy. We cannot just take a tech company's word that their new model is safe. We need government-funded, independent red teams. In information security, a red team is a group of hackers whose sole job is to relentlessly attack a system to find its flaws before the bad guys do. We need massive, institutionalized red teaming for every frontier AI model before it is released.
And we need tracking.
Right. Furthermore, the book demands know your customer requirements, the same way banks operate for anyone accessing powerful API interfaces. You shouldn't be able to access a top-tier ACI anonymously. And on the biology side, mandatory screening for all commercial DNA synthesis. If an order for genetic material matches a known pathogen sequence, the synthesizer must physically refuse to print it.
Step 3 shifts the focus to choke points. As we discussed earlier, the software is invisible, but the hardware is not. To train a massive AI model, you need highly specialized semiconductors. The manufacturing of these chips requires extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, lithography machines, primarily produced by a single company in the Netherlands called ASML.
Oh, I've read about them.
Yeah, these machines are the size of buses and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The authors argue that governments must utilize these physical choke points. By tracking the hardware, implementing strict export controls on advanced chips, and creating global registries for massive data centers, we can throttle the pace of development and buy ourselves time to implement the other steps.
Okay, so that's the technical layer. The next cluster of steps really focuses on the human element, the people building the tech, and the corporate structures funding it. Step 4 is about the makers. The authors argue that critics can't just throw stones from the outside. If you care about safety, you have to be in the trenches.
Precisely. The technologists, the engineers, the philosophers, they must work inside the frontier labs. They have to weave ethical alignment, safety protocols, and caution directly into the engineering culture and the code base from day one. You cannot bolt safety onto an AGI after it is built. It must be intrinsic to its architecture.
Which flows directly into step 5, businesses. The corporate structure itself has to evolve. For the last century, the primary legal duty of a corporation has been fiduciary to maximize profit for shareholders. But the authors argue that model externalizes the risks of the ways onto society.
We need new structures.
Right. We need new corporate structures, perhaps model on public benefit corporations, where a company has a legally binding mandate to balance profit with a duty to avoid societal harm. And crucially, we need strict liability. If a company open sources an AI model that is subsequently used to engineer a massive cyber attack, that company must bear legal and financial liability for the fallout. That changes the incentive structure instantly.
Now we move to the macroeconomic and global policy layer. Step 6 involves governments. The era of Silicon Valley's move fast and break things ethos is entirely incompatible with omni-use existential technology. Governments must abandon the laissez-faire approach and shift to a strictly licensed environment for frontier tech. You do not have a right to build a nuclear reactor in your backyard, and you should not have an unregulated right to train an ACI. Furthermore, to manage the fragility amplifiers we discussed, specifically the massive job displacement governments will need to heavily tax the automated wealth generated by AI and redistribute it to support the displaced human workforce, perhaps through universal basic income or massive retraining programs to keep the grand bargain intact.
But step 7 recognizes the glaring flaw in state-level regulation. The wave doesn't care about borders. So step 7 is alliances. If the U.S. regulates AI heavily, but a server farm in another country operates with zero rules, containment fails. The book points to historical precedents like the 1987 Montreal Protocol, where the global community successfully came together to ban CFCs to save the ozone layer. We need a similar architectural achievement.
A global effort.
Yeah, the authors echo proposals for a pandemic test ban treaty to govern synthetic biology. They also suggest the creation of an AI audit authority, a global regulatory body modeled on the IAEA with the power to inspect data centers, monitor compute capabilities, and enforce safety standards across international borders.
Achieving that requires an immense shift in global consciousness, which brings us to step 8, culture. The prevailing culture in tech is about speed, disruption, and rapid deployment. The authors argue we need a profound cultural pivot toward extreme caution and shared responsibility. They use the commercial aviation industry as a model.
That's good, Tim.
Aviation is incredibly safe because they have a culture of no blame reporting. If a pilot or a mechanic makes a mistake or observes a near miss, they report it to a central database, the ASRS system, without fear of losing their job. The entire industry learns from the anomaly and upgrades safety protocols. We need that exact culture in AI and biotech labs, open sharing of failures and vulnerabilities, so the entire ecosystem can patch the holes.
And step 9 recognizes that this cultural shift won't happen voluntarily in a vacuum. It requires movements. The public you listening right now cannot afford to be passive consumers, just waiting for the next tech drop. There has to be massive, organized public pressure. Just as the environmental movement forced corporations and governments to reckon with pollution, we need a global movement demanding that alignment, safety, and containment be prioritized over sheer speed and quarterly profits. The political will for containment must be generated from the ground up.
Which culminates in the final piece, step 10, coherence. This is about taking all these disparate layers, the technical safety, the audits, the corporate reform, the global treaties, the public movements, and walking the narrow path. To illustrate this, the authors reference economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson's concept of the narrow corridor. The narrow corridor is the highly precarious, constantly shifting space between a despotic, overbearing state and a collapsed, chaotic state. Liberty and safety only exist within this narrow band. The ultimate conclusion of the book is that containment is not a final destination. You don't sign a treaty, declare victory, and go home. Containment is a dynamic, treacherous, fog-covered tightrope that humanity must actively walk, balancing competing forces forever.
Let me stop you there and let me play the ultimate skeptic. Is this actually realistic? Look at the friction in the world today. We are asking the United States Congress, the Chinese Communist Party, hyper-competitive mega-corporations like Google and Microsoft, and anonymous biohackers operating in decentralized networks to all simultaneously agree to and actively enforce a complex 10-step global containment plan. The level of friction is astronomical. It sounds almost utopian to expect that level of synchronization.
It is an incredibly, almost unfathomably tall order. The authors themselves do not sugarcoat this. They acknowledge that achieving this level of global synchronized cooperation borders on the impossible given our current geopolitical dysfunction. But we have to return to the core dilemma. What is the alternative?
Catastrophe or dystopia?
Exactly. If we fail to walk this narrow path, the alternative is either the literal extinction of the human race through uncontained catastrophe or the permanent suffocating end of human freedom through a dystopian megamachine. When the only other options on the table are the end of our species or the end of our liberty, achieving the impossible is no longer just a hopeful aspiration. It becomes our absolute logical and biological imperative. We must try to build this architecture because the cost of failure is terminal.
What an intense, necessary journey. We have unpacked the unstoppable historical tide of Homo technologicus from the Luddites to the printing press. We've looked deeply at the mechanics of the terrifying, cross-catalyzing superwave of advanced AI and engineered synthetic biology that is crashing over our digital and physical infrastructure right now. We've examined how the asymmetric, omni-use nature of this tech is fundamentally fracturing the social contract of the nation-state, empowering bad actors while centralizing surveillance. We've stared down the agonizing dilemma of choosing between catastrophe and dystopia, and we've mapped out the incredibly narrow, precarious 10-step path of technical, political, and cultural containment that might just be our only way through.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought drawn from the concluding pages of the book. It is a concept that moves beyond the mechanics of regulation and hardware choke points. The authors briefly touch upon the idea of life after the Anthropocene.
What does that mean?
Let us assume the absolute best-case scenario. Let's say we do it. We coordinate globally, we execute the 10 steps, we successfully navigate the dilemma, we contain the existential risks, and we preserve our civil liberties. What does that world actually look like? We're entering an era where very soon the vast majority of your daily interactions, who you learn from, who you seek medical care from, who you collaborate with creatively, and perhaps even who you converse with for emotional intimacy, will be with highly capable, highly convincing artificial entities rather than flesh and blood humans. Even if we prevent the wave from destroying our physical world, it forces a profound philosophical reckoning. Before the century is out, how will relying entirely on artificial capable intelligence for our progress, our care, and our connection permanently redefine what it fundamentally means to be a human being?
That is the ultimate existential question we will all be answering in the years to come. Not in the philosophy class, but in our daily lives. Think back to the teenager in the garage we talked about at the very beginning. The technology to rewrite the code of life and intelligence is no longer theoretical. It is actively being assembled on the workbench. The check engine light of human civilization is flashing bright red, and the alarm bells are ringing from the very engineers building the engine. We can no longer afford the luxury of pessimism aversion. It's time to turn down the radio, look at the road ahead, and grab the wheel. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the coming wave. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.